Do you want to learn more on how to put money to work in regenerative food and agriculture? Follow our video course via investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/course or in the links below. Now, on to the podcast. We obviously talk a lot about food on this podcast, but there are other industries that source from the land and have massive environmental challenges and regenerative opportunities. For instance, the fashion industry, and specifically the luxury fashion industry, and specifically within that, the luxury leather industry. Today we learn what it takes to make a luxury shoe made with materials sourced from farms using regenerative practices. So many relevant lessons for the regenerative food movement. Enjoy! Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, investing as if the planet mattered. A podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food and what we eat. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. In March last year, we launched our membership community to make it easy for fans to support our work. And so many of you have joined as a member. We've launched different types of benefits, exclusive content, Q&A webinars with former guests, Ask Me Anything sessions, plus so much more to come in the future. For more information on the different tiers, benefits and how to become a member, check gumroad.com/investingregenag or find the link below. Thank you. Welcome to a very special episode because for the first time we step outside the world of food and agriculture and we go into the world of fashion. And today we have the founder and co-CEO of Koio, creating sustainable luxury footwear. And they're about to launch, or when you're listening to this, have already soft launched, let's say, a regenerative shoe. So welcome, Johannes. I'm so much looking forward to unpacking this.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Koen.
And I mean, unpacking, when I said it, it definitely wasn't intended as a pun, but we could do, we're not using video, but we could almost do this unboxing of a shoebox. But I want to start with a question, not necessarily why soil, because we'll get to that in a minute. That's usually my opening question. But in this case, how did you end up founding a sustainable luxury footwear company? Because you don't really come from a shoe family, let's say, I think.
Yeah, that's very true. I started Koio during business school with my friend Chris. We both did our MBA at Wharton. We're both German. And Wharton is a place where a lot of digitally native brands originated from. Warby Parker is probably one of the most well-known. And they had already launched when we arrived there in 2013. So Chris and I are originally from Germany. We both have a business background. I used to work as a consultant at McKinsey, and Chris was an investment banker at JP Morgan. But when we arrived at Wharton, the fascination that immediately caught us was around this business model of a direct-to-consumer brand. And at the same time, we were passionate about nicely designed sneakers. We hadn't known each other in Europe, but we both had this fascination around, nice Italian leather sneakers. And during our first jobs, we regularly saved up and afforded a pair every once in a while. And as we learned more about direct-to-consumer when we were in Philly, we brought this direct-to-consumer business model together with high-end footwear and realized that many traditional luxury brands were going to be disrupted by direct-to-consumer and digitally native brands at some point. So we wanted to be one of the companies that are disrupting. So we founded Koio and did that really as a project during business school. We even used some courses to work on it. But then after graduating, we decided to actually make it a real thing and move to New York and build the company from there.
And I think many people that go to business school, because I don't know, I never did, but start a project like this on the side or sort of started, I wouldn't say fakely, but it doesn't really turn into, you're not going to ship real shoes because there's a big difference between writing that business plan and doing the calculations and the models and all of that. And so what triggered it to actually saying, okay, we're going to actually turn this into a company and do this for the next X years? Was there a moment? Was there a decision? Was there a few beers involved? What happened there to make you to actually do that?
There was definitely a moment, maybe a few moments, that made us take this very seriously and make it into a real business. If I think about it, it was probably the summer between the first and second year of our MBA. That was when Chris and I dedicated a few months to the project. It was the first time that we went to New York. We then designed our first shoe, met with professors from New York's design universities like Parsons and FIT to learn about shoemaking and design. Definitely the areas that we had to catch up on the most. And it was a very special feeling when we held our first paper design of a shoe in hand, sort of in the middle of this period, in the middle of the summer. It made it much more tangible and got us much more invested in this project. And then towards the end of that summer, the most important thing happened. We decided to go to Italy to find a manufacturer and spend weeks in the country looking for the right partner to make our shoes. Knocked on doors, visited over 30 factories, and initially already got fairly lucky and got some high-end manufacturers. We found a Louis Vuitton manufacturer. We found a manufacturer for Common Projects, which is a brand that's quite popular in the US. It was at the end, however, that we actually found our dream factory, which was a Chanel factory. So they were producing shoes for Chanel, but also for Saint Laurent and Golden Goose. And they agreed to work with us and agreed to do our first batch. So at the end of that summer, we had a partner that could not have been better in terms of the quality, in terms of the designs they were able to realize. And we had committed to doing 300 pairs as a first batch. So we were kind of in it. So got the shoes then in like early 2015, right around when we were about to graduate, and organized a pop-up in New York where we sold those shoes for the first time. And we invited all our friends from business school, but also stopped people on the street and kind of forced them to go into our store. And people gave us really good feedback. The shoes looked beautiful. The manufacturer had done an amazing job interpreting our design and turning into really, really high quality shoes. And people bought the shoes. So we realized, hey, we're probably onto something.
And how difficult is it to sell shoes online? Like a digital native brand, as you mentioned, we've seen examples on glasses, which I think is very tricky as well. Mattresses, obviously, and many other things, shaving and all of that. Clothing has exploded as well, but shoes have seemed always to wouldn't say escape that, but it's, I think for many people, a tricky thing. Like, how do you approach that? And don't worry, listeners, we're going to get to the regenerative part very soon, but I'm very curious, how do you sell shoes online, actually?
Yeah, there are a lot of learnings for us over the years. It is just making the whole process very easy for anyone who goes through the buying process. Starts with being very present on all the channels where people might get to know brands, like Instagram, Facebook, definitely just getting your name out there and creating awareness for the brand. But then as soon as people get to your website, it's clear pictures, a clear user flow, showing reviews that are authentic and offering things like free shipping, free returns, having a size finder on the website that allows people to enter their regular shoe size or like foot measurements and then determine a Koio size. All the way to doing more exotic things like try before you buy program, where people leave their credit card information, but they don't have to pay the shoes yet. They get them shipped and then they can try them on. And if they like them, they keep them and will be charged. If not, they can send them back and will never be charged. So it's really very multifaceted and there's always new stuff happening and innovation being integrated. But yeah, it's quite the learning curve for sure.
I think it's very interesting in terms of really reducing any potential barrier, like real or imaginary, to get people to try them, to get people to actually. And I think the food industry probably, as we're a massive amount is moving online at the moment, we can learn a lot from that and how to get that first sale in, how to start building that relationship and making sure that direct to consumer relationship, which can be absolutely crucial. We've seen it in examples we had here on the podcast. La Vialla in Italy is one example, but many others. like to capture that full margin is an incredible amount of work. Like, let's not underestimate that. But if you're able to do it, it's also an incredible opportunity and really puts you in a position for very interesting growth or very interesting future potential because you're not so dependent on the retailers, etc. But then COVID hit and you were, I think at that time, still a mix of shoe shops and retailers and online. And what happened when the pandemic hit?
Yeah, the pandemic was obviously a big shock to the system. We are making shoes for social situations, and that include going for dinners with friends, traveling, going on dates, and suddenly from one day to the other, none of these happened anymore. It was a challenge, and we faced it head on and got through it in a very healthy way, fortunately. What happened for us during the pandemic was we saw a massive shift from physical retail to online. Before the pandemic, we had retail stores in New York, LA, San Francisco, Miami. And suddenly from one day to the other, nobody was buying there anymore. We refocused very much on online. During the pandemic, also refocused on 2 stores. So now we still have New York and LA. And online is by far now our dominant channel. So yeah, if you look at 2019, our sales were pretty much still almost 60% online, 40% retail, if you look at our direct channels. And by now it's a big majority online. So yeah, of our direct channels, about 80% are online, 20% retail.
Wow. Yeah, that's a shift that probably sounds similar to some food and agriculture players during the last 2 years, because it's almost 2 years we're in this mess. And so in terms of sustainability and then regeneration, obviously, where did that journey start? Were there any triggers? Was it from the onset the goal to really push the limits as you're doing now? Or was it something that grew into the company slowly or maybe more strongly? What were the triggers there?
It really happened in 3 phases from the beginning of Koio till now. And at the beginning, when we started the brand, Chris and I were convinced that we wanted to make a high-end product. And given that we wanted to make a high-end product, we wanted to make it not only nice and shiny and beautiful at the surface, we also wanted to make it really healthy at the core. And healthy at the core meant to us that we are complying with our ideas around sustainability. So in phase 1, right at the beginning of Koio, we decided to make high-end leather shoes. And to us, that was a sustainability activity because these shoes you can wear for years. And the longer you wear the product, the less waste you create. So that was a very important element for us. Secondly, we decided to make them in a country where generally labor standards are high, industrial standards are high. So we chose Italy as a place to manufacture the shoes over more emerging markets where some of these standards are not as well managed. That was the first phase. So very basic. We just focus on like very high quality and producing in a high standard country at a very high quality manufacturer. And then over the first 2 years, we got really interested in materials and wanted to improve our material sourcing and make that more environmentally sustainable. And it coincided with a lot of innovation around sustainability from the supplier side. So the leather manufacturers, the sole manufacturers, they all realized, hey, we can't ignore this sustainability trend. We really need to do something. So when you went to the leather fair in Milano, like Linea Pelle, that's a leather fair, you saw a lot of innovation. But what frustrated us when we did our first rounds of research and talked to suppliers was that many of these solutions were quite insular. So the innovations were, for example, vegan leathers, which we thought at first glance are great and we got really interested. But then as we looked into them, we heard they're actually just plastic. And another innovation was recycled leather, which is ground up leather that's then made into, recycled leather. also super excited at first. And then we learned in order to make this recycled leather, you need to add a bunch of chemicals and also plastic coatings. So for all of these quote unquote solutions, you're really only replacing one problem with another problem. And that's what we found extremely frustrating as we did our research. What we did end up doing in this phase 2 was we picked the materials that we found best in the current offering. So for leathers, we picked Leather Working Group certified leathers, which mean that the leathers are manufactured with very high standards in terms of waste management, chemicals management, water management, etc.
Because what are the issues with leather? I mean, apart from the animal side of things where we'll get to, but I think some people know, but just to paint the picture, what are the main issues with the leather industry in terms of, I mean, you mentioned waste, water and chemicals. How bad is it?
Yeah, I mean, it can be really bad. It really depends on who's making the leather. And that's why it's so important to know exactly who your suppliers are. If you look at the worst kind, like in some countries, leather is sourced from, meat farms that hold these animals in inhumane ways. And then it's tanned with toxic tannins like Chrome-6 that are carcinogenic and pose massive problems for people who work with this leather, but anyone also who lives near the tannery, all the way to the environment and people who wear the leather afterwards. But that's really the most extreme case. If you look at like Italian tannery, the problem with leather is that it's sourced probably from cows that are held fairly, like pretty much in captivity as part of the meat industry. So it's sometimes cows that are raised under questionable conditions. And then you need a lot of chemicals to make this leather. There are some 18 steps that you need to go through in order to turn a cowhide into actual leather, starting with salting and drying the hide, then removing all like fat and hair, and then starting pre-tanning and then a tanning, then the dyeing. There's often like plastic coatings that are applied to the leather. So yeah, a lot of steps, and each of them has a bunch of chemicals that are included. So it's very, very important to know exactly who you're working with and making sure that a tannery you work with is very considerate about chemical use and only uses the best ingredients in order to make the leather.
And then, I mean, you mentioned something fascinating I never thought about. Let's say the worst possible case. Like, are there actually cases of people getting sick because they wear something that has been treated very badly? Are there, because you mentioned even for the people that wear, of course, for the people that have to work with it and that live nearby, etc., but all the way down to the end consumer?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big problem in India, for example, that tanning often takes place with this toxic Chrome-6. And it stays in the leather, and it's really bad. I mean, it's released the skin. Exactly. Yeah. No, it's very important as a customer to know that you're wearing high quality leather.
And so in the best case, like what's the highest standard you can get to now in terms of chemical use? Is it really no danger chemicals, or is it very minimum amount? What's the ideal situation currently that you can actually work with as a company like yourself? And then we get to what's the ideal future scenario, but what's the best case scenario you can get to now?
What's important to know is that if you are wearing leather that's produced in Italy, you can assume that it fulfills the most important standards in terms of chemical use. So chrome tanning is the most commercialized tanning method, and it's the one that's used in Italy the most. And what high quality tanneries do is they only use chrome 3, which is a different state of the chrome and which is not toxic or anything like that. It is relatively tricky to maintain chrome 3 and not have it turn into chrome 6. That's why the industrial processes need to be very well managed, but it's also very doable, and Italian tanneries do that. So that's important to know. Like, if you get high quality leather, then there shouldn't be any concerns around health. Now, there's a lot of innovation happening in tanning. People want to move away from chrome, not only because of the risk of having it turn into chrome 6, but also because some people might be allergic to chrome or just don't want to have any metals in the leather. And therefore, there are different tanning agents being developed. A really promising one is one called zeolite. It's a tanning agent that is chrome-free, that's aldehyde-free, and where the leather can actually biodegrade. So extremely promising, and one that we're already working with. And then there's also always the super traditional vegetable tanning method, which is probably thousands of years old and probably the first tanning method ever, where you really use fruits or barks that contain tannins and use them to tan the leather. Some of the shoes that we're doing use this vegetable tanning method. The difference between something like zeolite and vegetable tanning is that with zeolite, you can create actual white leather and then make it any color you want. Also, the leather is very soft and malleable. Vegetable tanning only creates these like classic crunchy leather colors, like the chestnut colors, the darker colors. You can't achieve a true white with vegetable tanning. And it's also always a bit harder. So it takes a bit longer for the leather to get soft as you wear it in.
And so, I mean, I would go deep into materials, but I think we were still in phase 2.
Yeah, exactly. We're still in phase 2.
And perfectly fine to go down this rabbit hole because I'm extremely interested. Never thought about leather at this level. But what triggered stage 3, basically?
Stage 3 was triggered because we were still not happy with stage 2. We were obviously excited that we had found these materials like leather working group leather or recycled rubber or natural rubber to use in our outsoles. But we felt like all of these activities were going in different directions and there was no holistic umbrella or vision that united it all and made us go into one direction. And in the search for this vision, we talked with investors in Koio and people close to our brand. And it just so happened that one of our biggest investors, Acton Capital, and Jan Schulze, who's on our board.
Shout out to Jan. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Is a thought leader in regenerative agriculture and has invested a lot of time and effort in promoting this very interesting development. And as we started talking more about regenerative agriculture, we suddenly started seeing the link between regenerative agriculture and our product. And the link was cows. Cows play such an important role in regenerative agriculture with their potential to heal soil and build up organic matter and build up healthy soil, that we started thinking about ways to bring this holistic vision of regenerative agriculture into Koio. And as we started exploring this topic, we realized that, hey, we can actually create a product that sources leather from regenerative farming, and we can very likely also source other elements of the shoe from regenerative farming, the sole, the laces, and therefore make a shoe that is completely sourced from regenerative farms, which made suddenly all our activities converge. And that's when we realized, hey, this is the holistic approach that we were looking for. It's a clear vision that has a dramatic and positive impact on our ecosystems and our planet. And where as deep as you dig, you only see that it makes more sense and it's reinforcing. And it was a dramatic difference to all the other things that we had seen in the market before, like vegan leather or recycled leather, which were all so insular and not systemic at all. So yeah, it was that moment when we got really excited and started down the path of regenerative agriculture.
And it sounds easy on paper or in theory, like, oh, let's build a regenerative shoe and we're going to do the regenerative sole and the laces and of course the leather. And then reality hit. So you've launched or soft launched the shoe as we're putting this online. And where are you at now? I mean, a regenerative shoe, I don't think it existed yet, or it exists even in general. Like, what's the current status of the shoe? Where are you? And then we're going to talk, obviously, where you would like to go.
Yeah, indeed. We are launching the first regenerative luxury shoe, which is really incredible achievement. And we're super proud of everyone at Koio that we executed this together so quickly. It was really less than a year of like setting all this up, a really quick turnaround. And it's really challenging, like you say, and just looking at the leather, which is the main component of the shoe and also the one that's regenerative in this current version. If you look at how conventional leather is made, it's part of the massive meat industry. And in the meat industry, millions of cow hides are collected and go through the leather making process. It's very industrialized and it's highly specialized companies that take over a very specific step in the leather production. For example, there are tanneries that only work with the hide of the shoulders. And what they do is, because there's millions of cow hides, they procure a selection of cow hides that are virtually identical to one another. They just select the ones that are all looking the same and are exactly...
I can hear the issue coming up when cows are outside and have gone through managed grazing and holistic.
Exactly.
I can imagine they're not all the same. So what did the tanner say when you showed up with this idea of, let's say, adding some personality to the hides?
Yeah, exactly. You're pointing at the heart of the challenge. They told us it's a great idea, but then they went radio silent. So we kicked it off talking to all our current Italian suppliers, which do very high quality leather and are not always the big ones. There are also some more artisan style, smaller ones, but even those were already so specialized that they only work with certain parts of the skin. They require big amounts of hides because they have massive tanning drums that they need to fill.
It really sounds like processing of meat in general, or the food industry, of very specialized on a specific vertical or specific part of the vertical and saying, yeah, it would be great to do different size pumpkins, but we need them all the same because otherwise we just cannot cook the soup, or we cannot do that because the machines are made for tomatoes that are always exactly the same at exactly the same moment, etc. And so what did you do?
Absolutely. So yeah, we had to rethink the supply chain and basically had to build our own supply chain. And there were a few challenges. The biggest challenge was that supply of regenerative leather is super scarce. So there is, as you know, there are not many regenerative farms yet. It's very much a growing phenomenon. And because there's not many, there's no industrial system set up to collect hides, to select the ones that have a certain quality. So we had to really rethink the whole process. We basically accepted that would have to work with whatever cowhide we're getting. Or let me actually backtrack a little bit. We needed to find a place where a solid amount of cow hides that are sourced regeneratively are coming together. And we identified an abattoir in Switzerland that only procures cows from farms that are biodynamic, regenerative, or fulfill all of these standards. So for us, this abattoir became the key relationship. It produces about 10 hides per week, which equates about 100 pairs of shoes per week. And there we are basically getting all our hides from. And then these hides go from the abattoir to a hide dealer in Switzerland. They need to be removed from the abattoir for sanitary reasons and regulatory reasons very quickly. So the hide dealer is the one that takes the hides and salts them and dries them so that they can be transported. And then the next challenge was to find a tannery that can work with these non-industrial hides.
Because there are 10 hides, but they're all different for sure. Yeah,
exactly. They're all different. I mean, yeah, the cows that we're getting the hides from, they're actually the cows that are on alpine pastures and all summer long and are maintaining the alpine ecosystem by grazing and preventing overforestation. But yeah, you can imagine cows that are around on the mountains all summer, they have scratches and scars and there's pigmentation.
Does it mean like the shoes are going to get more personality? They're not going to be all the same? And is that for you a challenge and potentially opportunity to sell that story? Like, look, if your shoes are all the same, they probably come from this place, aka a CAFO. If your shoes are not all the same, it meant maybe the cow had a story.
Exactly. The story of a unique, beautiful, natural material is one that we 100% want to tell. And that adds a lot of personality and interest and value to the shoe.
And so then this hide dealer that I never knew that was a thing picks it up, and then you had to find this tanning, and that must have been a few knocking on a few doors as well. Someone that can process only 10 hides, because it sounds like that's not a lot. And then even very different ones, and getting to sort of a standard that you can send to your shoemaker in Italy.
Yeah, exactly. It was quite a challenge to find someone to tan these hides. We did have great support from people who are in the leather industry and are also very forward thinking around more sustainable methods. Eventually, we found this tannery in Germany that can produce in small batches and that also has very high standards in terms of what inputs they use and in general what methods they apply. So yeah, those are now the people that are tanning our hides, and the minimum quantity that we need to hit is 25 hides, so 250 pairs of shoes. We're always like collecting leather until we get that. And eventually, once that leather is ready, we ship it back to Italy to our manufacturer to have it turned into shoes. But here again, we're facing this challenge of a non-industrial production where when you cut the pattern pieces, you definitely have more imperfections. And sometimes they're nice and charming. Sometimes they're like pretty visible, and people who have high standards and expectations from a luxury shoe might not end up buying a shoe where you can see visible imperfections. So we would have to cut around those, which lowers the efficiency of the leather and makes production more expensive. But overall, and in the end, once we've gone through all the steps, we get a product that from far away looks like our best-selling and original sneaker, the Capri model, which is a clean and minimalist shoe. But if you look closer, you can really see this beautiful leather that has a lot of character and where you can rest assured that it really contributes to healthy ecosystems and a healthier planet.
And so what are next steps there? I mean, you're launching, obviously, you're going to sell this first batch and then hopefully slowly, I mean, there are not many, so you hopefully sell out, etc. And you'll be launching the first regenerative leather luxury shoe in the world. But what are the next steps like this year to tackle? Is it scaling up? Is it finding more hides? Is it changing the tanning? Is it working on the sole and the other pieces of the shoe? Like, what are you, maybe all of the above, but what are you mostly excited about to tackle this year?
In the very near term, our first goal will be to introduce more colors. The first capsule that we're dropping is going to be black leather and a chestnut colored leather, which are current top sellers. So that's great. But we want to introduce more colors. We're known for having an array of minimalist, neutral, quite beautiful colors. And we want to introduce an array of nice colors also for regenerative leather. That in itself is quite tricky because typically how you achieve color in leather is you chrome tan the leather and make it like, it's called wet blue, which is like a very like bright whitish blue. And then you can just dye it and have coatings and achieve the perfect color. But what we're doing here is we're sourcing the highest quality, most environmentally sustainable leather from the Swiss Alps. Obviously, we don't want to just put a plastic coating on it. We want to have a high quality tanning and dyeing method. And doing the research for that, how to achieve the right colors and the colors that we want is a whole other project. And that's what we're currently busying ourselves with. And then once we've introduced these colors, we can look into our long-term goal. Our long-term goal is to make a shoe that is completely sourced from regenerative farms and that is biodegradable. And if we break this down into both components, completely sourced from regenerative farms means sourcing the leather from regenerative farms, but also the outsole from regeneratively managed caoutchouc forests, tree rubber forests, the laces from regeneratively farmed cotton or hemp, and on and on and on, because a shoe has many components and many of them you don't even see, like backing materials or insoles. So our ambition is to, bit by bit, find out how we can source all of these components from regenerative farms. And then the second part to it is biodegradability. We want to make a shoe that if you were to throw it away into like the forest, it would actually biodegrade over a not too long period of time. And here the processing is super important next to the materials that we actually source. So the leather processing is very important. We need to find the right tanning method, the right dyeing method to make the leather super stable and comfortable, but also unstable enough so that it can decompose in the soil when it's around the right microbes. The same for all the other materials, the caoutchouc, outsole, and all the other elements. So yeah, it's a big vision, and it's definitely a lot of research and development work towards that, but we're making some very meaningful strides. One example of like a move towards biodegradability is we found a construction method where we basically don't have to use glue in order to combine the upper of the shoe, so the leather part, and the sole. And that's pretty much unheard of in sneakers. Right now, you still use a lot of glue in sneaker production to bond the upper and the bottom of the shoe. And by using that glue, you make it basically impossible to A, recycle, and B, have that shoe biodegrade. So yeah, finding a construction method that only uses stitching and no glue is a massive achievement, and something that we'll integrate in our shoes in the next 12 months.
Wow. And then what do you see for like this launch in the fashion industry? Do you see a lot of interest? Do you hope, I mean, obviously you might be hope to be sort of copied in terms of this impact and not necessarily on the designs, etc. But do you see this? Is there a growing interest in the sourcing of materials, in going as deep as you're going? I mean, there are a few examples. I think there's Vivo Barefoot on, definitely not on the luxurious path, but that have been very vocal about regenerative. There's Land to Market with Timberland on the leather side of things, but it's US. Obviously, you're selling in the US, but are sourcing in Europe. What do you see happening? Is there something happening beyond sustainable in the fashion space, or have I mentioned just the two others that are out there? That's pretty much it.
You have mentioned the two that are most prominent. Timberland is the one that immediately comes to mind. They've done great things. It's really impressive how such a big company is making meaningful commitments around regenerative. If you look at European brands, especially luxury conglomerates, it's interesting. They are definitely aware of it and want to do something in regenerative. I mean,
I've seen things like Gucci has made commitments,
exactly,
or big statements. Let's say commitments.
Exactly.
Is another word.
So Caring, for example, they launched a biodiversity fund to convert land use to regenerative farming practices. And LVMH now targets the preservation or restoration of 5 million hectares of habitat for flora and fauna by 2030. In the US, Ralph Lauren Foundation, they just announced a grant for regenerative cotton of $5 million. So you can see that people are aware of it and they're doing something. But at this point, it seems like it's really like chief sustainability officer.
And communication officer, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
And not chief product officer. Yeah.
Exactly. And some fund commitments, which are probably even fairly small in comparison to the revenues that these companies are making. So I think that awareness is there, but many conglomerates and brands find it extremely challenging to make a regenerative product reality. And yeah, I get it. It's really hard, and you really need to rethink your whole supply chain, and you need to be happy with relatively modest volume at the beginning and then find ways to scale that. And we're very lucky in that we're, on the one hand, established company. We've been around for a couple of years now. And on the other hand, are still nimble enough to find such a project meaningful. Therefore, we're probably just, at the right size to be a leader in regenerative luxury footwear.
And just to give an idea for people that are not so much in the space, like the luxury world is enormous. Like how much money is going through there every year? I mean, maybe 2020 wasn't a good year to measure, but in terms of sheer size, what are we talking about more or less? Like these conglomerates you mentioned are not household names, usually Kering and LVMH, but they are mostly family owned still and absolutely massive. Just to give a number, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. Bain does this great study where they look at the luxury market. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but
we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely not to underestimate market. And if you would be telling investors that are interested in regeneration and regen ag and food, what would you, obviously without giving investment advice, but what would you tell them where to look in the fashion industry? Is that companies like yourself that are not too big, not too small? Is that startup? Is that really the technology side of things? Where do you get excited for potential investments or for investors to, let's say, dig a bit deeper and potentially also investing? What parts of the fashion industry are extremely interesting from a regeneration perspective?
Yeah, I think it's very case by case, and it's the companies that are extremely authentic about their efforts and that go deep in these efforts. You can see it with sustainability, with the sustainability wave over the last 10 years. Only a few companies were really, really serious. And for a lot of them, it was a marketing promotion and it was greenwashing. So if you look at regenerative, it has to be companies where people are going super deep and question everything, because those are the ones that are going to be around and will be able to be challenged on this topic over years and withstand any public scrutiny around this topic, which will for sure happen as regenerative becomes more popular and the public starts to ask more questions around it.
And where do you see, we're not going to conferences very often, but at the moment when you talk to peers in the fashion industry that are looking at sustainability and are going deeper, where do you really think different? Like, what do you believe to be true? What others in your peers not necessarily agree on? Like, where are you contrarian? And this question definitely comes from John Kempf, inspired by his podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there's a massive trend towards anything vegan right now. And I see the solution as being much more holistic than just focusing on vegan. We talked about it briefly before, but
let's unpack it a bit more. Like, what's the biggest issue there? Because I see the examples, I see fruit leather coming up.
It sounds wonderful.
I don't know enough about it. And you saying, but it's like, is the main, I wouldn't say argument against it, but the main issue with it, all the plastics and all the chemicals, but like, what's the main issue with it and why hasn't it taken off? As I've seen many nice pilots, let's say, or nice small examples, like, of course, there's pineapple leather, and of course, and I thought that would be amazing. Mm-hmm. What is your response as a shoemaker and shoe seller to that?
Yeah, I was equally excited. Fruit leather, pineapple leather, apple leather, mushroom leather. And as soon as we heard about it, we looked into it. What we quickly saw was these materials are kind of monsters in the sense that, sure, you have some organic component of it that comes from apples or pineapples or mushroom, but there's so much plastic in these things. Sometimes it's a majority of the final product is plastic. And then it's back to that problem. You're replacing one issue with another issue, and not only perpetuate these materials fossil fuel dependency, or if you have plastic that is plant-based, in most cases very likely monoculture farming, you also have a product where all sorts of different compounds are mixed together and bonded together, and that stuff is never going to be able to be recycled because you can take these components apart, and it's also not going to biodegrade. So the only place this is going to end up is a landfill. And for that reason, it's not a solution at all. And in contrast to that, the leather that we're sourcing is still a byproduct of the meat industry. Like if you look at it's really a waste product, and oftentimes cow hides are burned or thrown away because in many cases it's not economic to turn them into leather. If you look at the value of a cow hide, it's actually less than the tongue of the cow. So it's
wow.
It's like,
and especially I'm imagining sorry to interrupt, but this line you're developing now or you're launching now are cow hides that have even less value because they are not perfect.
Exactly.
And the chances of them being thrown away are very, very high, I'm imagining.
Exactly. Most of them would be thrown, if not all of them would be thrown away. And we're taking these hides that throughout the cow's life have really contributed to a healthy planet and maintaining a beautiful ecosystem, the Swiss Alps, and then value that material and appreciate it and make leather out of it in the most responsible and environmentally friendly ways that are possible. So yeah, if I look at these two options, is vegan, like plastic hybrid leathers and our regenerative leathers, I would always pick our leather in terms of the overall impact and what it does for the planet.
And have there been any like life cycle assessments or LCAs done on these different materials just to see? Because I know in the vegan space, we had Brett Willicroft or Brett van Stone of Willicroft, which is a vegan cheesemaker, and they did an LCA on their ingredients or their vegan cheese and found out it was not as impactful as they hoped. And so they completely overturned their ingredient list from cashew nuts to beans and white beans and started working with dairy farmers to change their practices into buying white beans from them, etc. And that triggered quite a huge shift in the company. But they also see that many vegan cheesemakers are not looking beyond their ingredient list, or actually not looking at their ingredient list. And because it's vegan, it's better in terms of impact, but that turned out not to be the case. So are you seeing any of that happening in the vegan leather space, or is it that too early, or you see vegan leather and people think it's better than anything else?
Yeah, it's that heuristic that's happening right now. I haven't seen anything compelling around like the life cycle assessment. I mean, some companies measure their carbon impact, but yeah, we looked into that as well. In the end, it's other providers that offer this service, and these assessments are extremely expensive. We looked into it. It was something like $100,000 per style, and we have like 20, 30 styles. We'd rather invest that money into research and digging deep and doing something that we feel is absolutely right than trying to show something.
And in terms of difference for the farmer, maybe that's a step too far at the moment, but the fact that you're bringing value or creating value out of practically a waste product, would that at some point, maybe not now, would that at some point be interesting for the farmer as well? Would it always be so little that it's maybe 2 tongs or something like that it can have a difference? Or what do you see there as for the bottom line of a farmer? Would that be, or a rancher, sorry, I always get corrected when I say it wrong. For a rancher, would that be at some point interesting to also supply this or to also get value from something that anyway is produced as we're producing meat, if we continue to do that, obviously?
Yeah, I would love that. My conviction is that by going regenerative and being very vocal about it, we're increasing demand and are creating a pull for these kinds of ranching and farming methods. And then eventually I would love if we were part of the system that incentivizes more farmers to go regenerative. And if we do that by paying more for the hides, I'm like super happy to do that.
And not as a final question, because I have a few more and it's never the final question, but if there's one thing you could change in the fashion industry, I usually ask it about agriculture and food, but in this case, let's say the land use industry or how you're touching that. If you have a magic wand, what would that be? What would be your one? Could be anything, could be from a taste, could be colors, could be chemical tanning, could be anything you can possibly imagine, or consciousness. But what would it be if you had this global power? What would be your one thing you would change overnight?
It would be complete transparency about production processes, because I think there is a lot that customers don't see and a lot that many brands get away with. And for us as a brand that really tries to do things right, we're having to do so much education and convincing of customers of what we're doing and why it's better that, yeah, I wish there were perfect transparency and everyone could see the reality and be much better informed in that way and make better decisions when they're buying fashion.
And let's say you would be, so you'd no longer have the magic wand, unfortunately, but you are in charge of a large investment portfolio. Focusing could be on fashion, but on sustainability, maybe in general, or regeneration. Where would your priorities be? Would you set up your own tanning? Would you start your own ranch? Would you launch other brands into different areas of the fashion industry? What would you do if you wouldn't be the shoemaker and seller or the shoe seller, but if you would be an investor in the space? What would you prioritize?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would focus on the supply chain because, yeah, like I said, that's one of the big challenges that we face. And I would probably invest in turning ranching into regenerative and scaling that or replacing current conventional meat production with regenerative, environmentally beneficial meat production. And then, yeah, we would use the byproducts, the hides, to make the leather and also tan it in a responsible way and make these shoes. Yeah, that would be a focus.
So you would really focus, really the bottleneck at the moment is the number of hides. If I like to source them in a big enough bundle, because you cannot have them like 2 in Portugal, 1 in Denmark, and then another few a week in Norway, and then a few in Germany. Like you need them sort of concentrated. That's why you're in Switzerland. But that's the biggest bottleneck at the moment. You're saying, I mean, apart from a lot of research into glue replacement and all of that, is just the number of biodynamic or at least close to regenerative hides you're getting in Europe.
That's correct. Yeah. We wish we had easier access to those.
That's fascinating to hear. If anybody has 10 or 20 hides a week laying around in Europe, they should definitely give you a call, I think.
Yes, please let us know.
I want to thank you so much for sharing, Johannes, and for your openness and to this journey into leather that I never thought we would do, but I'm very happy we did because I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the different sides of the business, the complexity, the chemical use, and that you can even get sick if leather has been treated very, very, very badly. Again, that's not a norm, but it can happen, which is an interesting bridge, obviously, to the food industry, where we talk about food as medicine a whole lot. But I never imagined, and it makes so much sense when you think about it, that what you wear obviously gets into your skin and into your body as well. So thank you, and good luck with the launch. It will be, when we're listening to this, it will be launched, and I'm hoping it sells out very quickly, which means you need to get to work and get to the next batch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Koen. It was great being with you.
If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number 1, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number 2, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number 3, if this podcast has been of value to you, and if you have the means, please join my membership community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on gumroad.com/investingregenag or in the description below. Thank you so much, and see you at the next podcast. Dear friends of the podcast, I'm super excited to share with you the online video course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. How to put money to work in regenerating soils at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. Why are we doing this course? After 100 interviews and more than 100 hours of audio asking the question how to put money to work in regenerating soils, and have been following the space since 2011 and recording these podcasts since 2016, we thought it was time to share our lessons learned. What have we seen in the space over the last years? How have we built our decision-making framework? What to focus on with the podcast? How have we picked interviewees? And what questions should you ask? What is happening in the space? What should you read? What should you listen? What should you watch? How to approach this space? For whom is this course? You, the soil builders and investors in this space. The soil builders, people working in this space, entrepreneurial farmers, fund managers, vehicle builders, crowd investing, platform builders, agtech companies, farm-to-gut food companies, permaculture, keyline designers, holistic management consultants, etc., etc. People that are building soil at scale. and the investors who are putting their own money to work through their family office or as private individuals, or people who are putting other people's money to work through foundations, institutional capital, banks, insurance companies, etc. Is this course free? No. This is pay what you think it's worth. Meaning, I have no way of knowing what this course will be worth to you. And I'm very aware that among the listeners of this podcast, we have people with very different means. So I'm inviting you, if this course is creating value to you, and if you have the means, to consider paying what you think it's worth. Thank you. So what is this course? It's currently a series of 17 videos, mostly ranging from 10 to 15 minutes, plus PDF slides, so you don't have to ride along. We're going to look into why invest in regenerative agriculture and why extractive agriculture is so risky, how to invest, what kind of frameworks you could and I think should build, what to invest in, what kind of co-investors you could find, or what kind of investors you could find if you're a soy builder. Every lesson will have a digging deeper part where I will share what kind of reports, what kind of interviews, what kind of videos you can look into if you want to dig deeper. We're going to look at nutrient density, landscape design, and a lot more. So what is it not? It's not a list of investable deals. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in this world. We're really at the beginning of the regenerative agriculture and food revolution. It's also not investment advice. Before making any investment, please find professional investment advice. So get ready, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever you're drinking. Click on the link below, sign up, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback.